My name is Evelyn. I'm 55 years old, and I want to share something deeply personal with you. It's not easy to talk about, but I believe stories like mine matter, even if they're tangled and imperfect. This is about a time in my life when I felt invisible, and then, suddenly, seen. I've been married to Richard for over 30 years. We built a good life together, or so it seemed. In the early years, we were partners in every sense, sharing dreams, raising our son Ethan, building a home filled with laughter and late-night whispers. I loved him, deeply. And for a while, I believed that was enough to keep us going. But time has a way of shifting things without your permission. Richard slowly grew distant. The warmth in his eyes began to fade. The small gestures, touches, compliments, the simple joy of looking at one another, disappeared. Our conversations turned mechanical, and eventually, we stopped seeing each other. I became something like a shadow in my own home. Days passed quietly, marked by chores and silence, and I often wondered if anyone truly noticed me anymore. Ethan, our only son, had always been my light. His energy, his passion for life, it kept me grounded. When his best friend Lucas started visiting more often, I didn't think much of it at first. Lucas was 23, full of life and ambition, always respectful and polite. But over time, I began to sense something different in the way he looked at me. Not inappropriate, not forward, just present. He saw me. It had been so long since anyone had. One weekend, Richard and Ethan went on a short trip together. Lucas came by that evening to return something Ethan had left behind. I invited him in for coffee, grateful for the company. What started as small talk somehow unfolded into one of the most honest, vulnerable conversations I'd had in years. I told him about the loneliness. About how it felt to be surrounded by people but still feel invisible. About the ache of being forgotten. He listened, really listened, with a calm empathy I didn't expect. He never interrupted, never dismissed what I said. There was no judgment in his eyes, only kindness. That night changed something in me. Lucas stayed on the couch while I went to bed, but I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning. His words had stirred something inside, something I had long buried. Not romance. Not desire. Just the feeling of being valued, of being known. The next morning, he appeared in the kitchen as I was making breakfast and said with a warm smile, "Good morning, Evelyn. That smells amazing." I smiled back, feeling my heart flutter in a way I hadn't felt in years. Over the next few days, Lucas stopped by more frequently. He knew I was alone, and perhaps he sensed I needed someone to talk to. We shared quiet moments, tea in the garden, long conversations, the occasional laugh that lingered in the air like music. The distance between us grew smaller in those still hours. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, we sat together in the backyard. Lucas turned to me and said softly, "You know I'm really drawn to you, don't you?" I didn't know what to say. My breath caught. I looked away, unsure of what was right or appropriate. But then he gently reached for my hand and added, "You're an incredible woman. You deserve to feel that." That moment broke something open in me. A dam I didn't know was there gave way. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't lecture myself about right or wrong. I just sat there, in that rare space of emotional honesty, and allowed myself to feel. What grew between us was delicate and deep, not built on impulse, but on understanding. Lucas reminded me of a version of myself I thought had been lost, vibrant, strong, worthy of attention. He didn't try to fix me. He just stood beside me, fully present. But this emotional bond came with its own weight. Guilt often tugged at my heart. I thought of Richard, of our marriage, of the promises we once made. I thought of Ethan and how he'd feel if he ever suspected how close I'd become to his friend. These thoughts haunted me, but they didn't erase what was happening inside of me, this quiet awakening to my own worth. One afternoon, Lucas and I took a small trip to a beach town just outside the city. We walked barefoot on the sand, letting the wind wrap around us like a secret. The ocean stretched wide before us, vast and forgiving. Lucas turned to me and whispered, "When I'm with you, nothing else matters." I cried then, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Because I realized I hadn't felt that kind of emotional safety in years. As we drove home, the car filled with soft music and silence that didn't need to be filled, I stared out the window, a strange calm blooming in my chest. Lucas glanced at me and said, "Today was really great, Evelyn." And it was. Not because of anything grand or dramatic. Just because I had felt alive. At one point, he pulled the car over beside a quiet, shaded grove. He didn't say much, just reached for my hand again. I let him. In that silence, everything between us was understood. There was no rush, no crossing of lines, just closeness, respect, and the kind of understanding that words often fail to capture. What we shared was more than friendship, but it was also something gentler than romance. It was two lonely souls meeting in a moment of need and offering each other something they didn't even know they were missing. There was no plan, no future promises, just the now, and the gratitude of being seen. I don't know what the future holds. I still have choices to make, truths to face, and conversations that will be hard. But I carry that time with me, the days I remembered who I was beneath the years of silence. The days I looked in the mirror and didn't feel invisible anymore. Lucas reminded me that life doesn't stop just because we grow older. That there is still wonder, still connection, still the possibility of healing. And for that, I will always be thankful. The days that followed felt like standing at the edge of two different lives. One was the familiar rhythm of my marriage, my home, the life I had built with Richard. The other was this quiet, unexpected sense of renewal, like a flame had been sparked in a place I thought had long gone cold. Lucas didn't try to take up space that wasn't his, he never pushed or demanded. Instead, he showed up with a kind of tenderness I'd forgotten could exist. He stopped by sometimes just to see how I was doing. We'd sit with cups of tea in the late afternoon sun, talking about everything and nothing, the books we loved, the places we dreamed of visiting, the strange ache of growing older and wondering if you're still needed. His presence became a gentle rhythm in my week. Familiar. Comforting. But guilt is a quiet storm. It doesn't shout. It builds in silence. One evening, I sat alone in my bedroom after Richard had returned from his trip. He was already asleep, turned away from me in the bed we'd shared for decades. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the weight of so many unspoken things pressing down on my chest. I wasn't sure when we'd stop talking, or why. All I knew was that somewhere along the way, we had both gone missing from each other's lives. I thought of Lucas's laugh, the way he asked about my day and listened without distraction. I thought of how he remembered the little details, how I liked my tea, the songs I hummed without realizing. I thought about the way he looked at me like I mattered. And for the first time in years, I realized how much I had been surviving instead of living. Still, I was a mother. A wife. A woman raised to believe that love meant sacrifice. I couldn't shake the fear of what might happen if the delicate balance of my world tipped too far in either direction. I couldn't bear the thought of hurting Ethan. Or watching the look in Richard's eyes if he ever found out what had grown quietly between his wife and his son's best friend. So I did the only thing I could do. I pulled away. I stopped answering Lucas's texts right away. I let the silence stretch longer between his visits. When he came by one afternoon, I kept my smile polite but distant. He seemed to understand, though his eyes looked a little dimmer that day. "You're pulling back," he said softly, not accusing, just acknowledging. "I have to," I whispered. "I don't know how to make sense of this. I don't know what it means." He nodded, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. "I just want you to be happy, Evelyn. That's all I ever wanted." His words broke me. Because deep down, I knew he meant them. And because I knew he might be the only person who had said that to me in a long, long time. That night, I sat by the window long after the lights had gone out in the rest of the house. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows across the floor. And I let myself cry, not just for Lucas, but for all the years I had kept myself small. For all the moments I had swallowed my needs, quieted my voice, convinced myself that loneliness was the price of loyalty. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if I had the strength to confront Richard, or the courage to tell Ethan the truth. But I knew one thing. I had remembered myself. And that was the beginning of everything. Weeks passed. The leaves began to change, painting the streets in amber and rust. Autumn always brought a strange mix of melancholy and reflection for me, and that year, it arrived like a mirror to my soul, quietly, beautifully, and full of aching transition. I focused on routine. Morning walks. Cooking. Folding laundry. Pretending that nothing inside me had shifted. Richard remained unaware. If he noticed anything different, he didn't say. Our conversations stayed on the surface: groceries, Ethan's work, bills, plans. We moved around each other like two planets sharing an orbit but never really touching. I sometimes wondered if he too felt the same emptiness and had just grown used to it, as I had. But I hadn't just grown used to it anymore. I had seen what it felt like to be awake again. Lucas had stopped visiting as often. He respected the distance I had drawn, but sometimes I'd catch his name when Ethan mentioned him, and it would land in my chest like a stone in water, rippling out and pulling everything back into memory. I missed him. I missed me when I was around him. One chilly Saturday afternoon, I found myself at the edge of town, walking a familiar trail near a lake Ethan used to play by as a child. The wind tugged gently at my coat, and the bare trees creaked quietly above. There, in that solitude, the dam I'd built inside me finally cracked. I sat on a weathered bench and spoke aloud, just to the sky, to the trees, to whatever was listening. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'm wrong for wanting more. The breeze answered with silence, and yet I felt lighter having said it. I realized then that I hadn't betrayed anyone, not really. I had simply felt. After years of emotional starvation, I had opened myself up to the smallest offering of connection, and it had changed me. That didn't make me cruel. It made me human. That evening, I stood in the kitchen while Richard read the paper in the living room. I watched the way the lamplight cast soft shadows across the room. I looked at him, not just as my husband, but as the man he was now. And for the first time in a long time, I saw how tired he looked. Not just physically, but in his soul. Had he felt this same loneliness all along and simply not known how to name it? "Richard," I said quietly. He looked up. We don't talk anymore." He blinked, surprised by the bluntness. "What do you mean?" I don't know the last time we really looked at each other. Or asked each other how we're doing, and meant it. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. And maybe you feel the same." He set down the paper, his mouth tightening, eyes uncertain. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, softly, "I think I stopped trying because I thought you stopped needing me." The words stunned me. "Why would you think that?" "I don't know. Maybe I got caught up in work. Maybe I just didn't know how to connect anymore." We got used to the silence. And just like that, something inside me softened. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me that Richard, too, was a person with unspoken pain. We didn't solve everything that night. But we talked. For the first time in years, we really talked. We spoke about the distance. The years we'd gone on autopilot. The small resentments. The quiet grief. There was no yelling. No blame. Just truth. I didn't tell him about Lucas, not yet. That truth lived in a separate room of my heart. One I might open later, or maybe never. Not out of shame, but because Lucas represented something I needed at the time, an emotional mirror, a flicker of forgotten worth. He wasn't a mistake. He was a chapter. As the months passed, things between Richard and me changed. Slowly. Gently. We went to counseling. We started eating dinner at the table again. We even began walking together in the evenings. It wasn't perfect. But we were trying. And sometimes, late at night, I would still think of Lucas. His steady voice, his warm eyes, his quiet understanding. Not with longing, but with gratitude. He had entered my life at a time when I was drowning silently, and he reached out his hand without asking for anything in return. He reminded me that I was still in there, beneath the years of fading and forgetting. That reminder was a gift. One I would carry forever. Winter arrived softly that year. Snow drifted down like whispers from the sky, and the world outside turned white and still. I often found myself staring out the window, watching the flakes fall in slow spirals, wondering how something so delicate could change the shape of everything it touched. Inside, life had settled into a rhythm again, but it was different. Richard and I had begun to see each other as people again, not just roles we played. There were days when I still felt the ache of uncertainty, but they were fewer now. We laughed more, sometimes nervously, like two people relearning a language they'd forgotten. Other times we sat in comfortable silence, just grateful to be trying. One afternoon, as I cleared out old boxes in the attic, I came across a photo of myself taken years ago, maybe when I was 30. I was smiling, radiant and full of life, arms outstretched at the edge of a lake during a family trip. I stared at the image for a long time. That woman had once been lost to me. Now, I realized, she wasn't gone. She had simply been waiting, for space, for breath, for someone to remind her she was still there. That evening, I wrote a letter. I didn't intend to send it, but I needed to let the words out. Dear Lucas. I don't know if you'll ever read this, and maybe that's for the best. But I want to thank you. Not just for the kindness you showed me, or the time you gave, but for seeing me, truly seeing me, when I had forgotten how. You reminded me that I am still capable of feeling deeply, of connecting, of being more than just someone's wife or mother. You gave me space to rediscover my voice, to feel like a woman again, not because of romance, but because of recognition. What we shared was quiet, complicated, and deeply real. I carry it with me not as a regret, but as a gift. And while I've chosen a different path, one that asks me to rebuild something long neglected, I do so with a heart more whole than it's been in years. Thank you for being part of that. With warmth always. Evelyn. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not to forget, but to honor. Because not every story needs a conclusion to be meaningful. Some people come into our lives to change us gently and leave without staying. And that's their purpose. Spring eventually followed winter, as it always does. The days grew brighter, and with them, so did I. One morning, as Richard and I worked in the garden together, him humming tunelessly, me planting fresh blooms, I looked up at the sky and smiled. I had spent years searching for a way back to myself. And while it hadn't come in the way I expected, it had come all the same. I was still Evelyn. A little older, a little wiser. Still married. Still flawed. But more alive now than I had been in years. And that, I realized, was enough.